Okay, so this lecture is a brief lecture on family systems theory. Um, it's brief. We do have an entire course on family systems, and I know it's required for clinical mental health counseling, but I highly recommend the course. Um, There are a number of theorists that are included in family systems. We already talked about Alfred Adler, but he was one of the earliest to consider aspects of family in theory. And I just want to point out in my notes that uh, I just give the high points of each theory with terminology and vocabulary and concepts. But I also included my own family systems paper that I wrote when I was a student, and it applies many of the theories that we talk about. It also even maps out charts, and it's applied to family systems case. It has treatment plans and goals. It has a life event timeline, and it also has a short genogram with a legend at the end. So I would encourage you not only to read the notes, but please read my paper so that you can understand how to apply these various theories to a family system. The other thing I included are just some keys to how to create a genogram. There is a book on genograms that you can purchase. It's an interesting book because they take very famous people like Abraham Lincoln, the Kennedys, things like that, and they actually create genograms for them in the book, and they discuss why they made the choices that they made. Now, the most extensive notes I have are on Murray Bowen, and he has some key concepts, 8 key concepts for family systems theory. Virginia Satir, all about communication. Carl Whittaker, Salvador Minuchin, structure. Jay Haley and Chloe Maddens. Those are the primary names. I don't go into a lot of personal history with these theorists because there's just a lot of information to cover with all of these various theories. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through a discussion of these notes, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen, and I am going to start with Murray Bowen. There are 8 key concepts. Differentiation of self is the first one. You know, if you've ever read Khalil Gibran, The Prophet, there's one section in that book where somebody asks Khalil Gibran about marriage or relationships, and he answered that it's like people in a temple. It's like each person is a pillar in a temple, and the marriage or relationship is the roof to that temple. And if the pillars are too close to each other, it could not support that roof. If the pillars are too far apart, it could not support the roof. So they have to be together and yet separate. So differentiation of the self is psychological separations of independence and emotion, also independence of self for others. That's a good thing. What is an unhealthy thing would be an undifferentiated self, when individuals fuse with others emotionally, or with other people in the family. This is where the concept of codependence originates. There is a fantastic book called Codependent No More. And whenever I see them at yard sales for 50 cents or $1, I buy them and just give them out to students and clients and friends. It is so prevalent, codependency. So codependent no more. So even though he didn't use these words, this is kind of where the ideas stem from. People can become fused and begin their own family. Thus, it becomes multi-generational because their children learn what this is like as well. So by being fused, being too close, it's almost as if my sense of emotional well-being and self-worth is based on another person's opinion of me or acceptance of me. It's kind of a conditional acceptance rather than an unconditional acceptance. Triangulation. Okay, so triangle, 3 instead of 2. Anxiety can occur in a 2-person relationship, and a third party could be brought in. However, the real conflict is never really addressed, and it may become worse over time. So think about this. Think about 2 people who were brought up in enmeshed families or infused families that were codependent, and so they both are familiar with that. They feel comfortable with that kind of relationship, and when they meet each other, they are drawn to each other very quickly. So often they'll move in together or get married very quickly. And then, of course, there's some tension and anxiety. So, hey, the triangulation might begin. Maybe somebody's parent is involved, or they might get a pet, and that pet is wonderful when it's a puppy or a kitten, but then you've got to feed it and take care of it and clean up after it, and that might add some more anxiety after a while. Often then they have a child, and that shifts the focus. But of course we know, hey, children bring about sleep deprivation and worry, and and then one of the individuals might need a friend to talk to. Well, the friend, they feel very comfortable with this person. Why? Well, because they found another codependent. And eventually, they feel so comfortable with them that they end the first relationship and begin another relationship without ever dealing with their own issues. So the issues continue and it becomes a cycle. People ask, well, why do all my relationships end up the same way, negatively? Well, it's because we never address our underlying issues. The nuclear family system. This is, of course, a concept of the nuclear family emotional system, describes 4 basic relationship patterns. Now, I gave you an entire separate sheet on triangulation and the nuclear family emotional system. It talks about those 4 things separately: marital conflict, dysfunction in one spouse, impairment of one or more children, and emotional distancing. So read through those extra sheets that I gave you. Often one spouse could have either an emotional problem or an addiction or alcoholism, something, and the other spouse begins being an enabler. However, the relationship usually ends. Okay, number 4, family projection process. The family projection process describes the primary way parents transmit their emotional problems to a child. Emotional cutoff is pretty much exactly what it sounds. Managing unresolved emotional issues with parents, siblings, other people by reducing or totally cutting off emotional contact with them. Multi-generational transmission process. It talks about how not only do these issues get passed down from parent to children, but they become worse as the generations move forward. Sibling position. This goes all the way back to Adler, but it's a little more technical with Bowen. And societal regression or emotional process. So he believes that not only can we apply these concepts to family systems, but we can apply them to any system, like a work environment or a school environment or any system that has personal dynamics in it. All right, so let's look at some of the other theorists. Okay, Virginia Satir, one of my favorites. She talks about what is functional communication or healthy and what is dysfunctional communication. She talks about that with families in a family group, and she can talk about different defensive stances like placating, where we kind of lose ourselves, whatever you want. Blaming. Blaming never succeeds in anything other than continuing the original argument. Being super reasonable is really striving for control. And irrelevant behavior or distractions are like, maybe we shouldn't argue, maybe we should, do something fun. Let's go to the park, let's go to a restaurant, but it never solves the original problem. And she talked about very specific roles and trials. For instance, Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about these as well. So one child might be a peacekeeper, one might be a rebel, one might be the perfect child. Every person in the family has some kind of role. Family sculpting and family reconstruction. She moves people around. She sits people in other people's seats. She puts people next to each other in the sessions. She also actually does physical family sculpting, where people actually get up and place their bodies in a physical pose that illustrates an emotion. So perhaps one is fearful or angry or aggressive. What would that look like? And then when the family sees that, it brings out an emotion that they can communicate about and process. Carl Whittaker, Experiential Family Therapy, He has a subjective focus on experience with the family. He likes working with a co-leader. Doesn't focus on any specific theory. I think he integrates a lot. But he is famous for exploring family secrets. Oh, we don't share that with the neighbors. Every family has secrets. He wants to talk about them and process them and overcome them. Why are they secrets? May create turmoil in the session and then work through it. And he often uses a co-therapist to do that. He'll talk to a co-therapist about the family and allow them to listen to their conversation. Salvador Minuchin, Structural Family Therapy. This is all about family mapping, subsystems, boundaries, reenacting role plays, conflicts, and reframing and creating new interpretations. And in my paper that I included, you'll see all of the different family maps that I drew, and it'll give you a better understanding of that. Of course, Jay Haley and his wife, they're now divorced. They talk about power structures, and I also mapped this out in my paper as well. These are all examples of symbols for genograms. I usually use colors for the emotional relationships. This is the paper, talks about my theoretical approach, which is a little different. I use cybernetic epistemology and a few other things. This is a basic family intake, what we talk about to get a case history of the family. This is all the structural mapping and the boundaries and coalitions and alliances. And then we talk about interventions for the family. We come up with a treatment plan. This is a genogram. You can see how I use colors for emotions. I make comments. This blue line is who is actually living together under one roof. And I always include a key or legend that explains the different things. This is a timeline of critical life events, both positive and negative. Some references, and that is a brief overview of family systems. So I hope that gives you some basic insights, and between the chapter and the PowerPoint and reading the paper, I think you'll get a fairly decent intro to family systems.